Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this session about a redemption story of Apache Pulsar. My name is George Orban. I'm a tech lead in a small team looking after a pricing engine and trading platform for a group of trading desks, mainly focusing on convertible bonds and other derivative products. We're mainly concerned about calculating real-time analytics, real-time pricing and risk analytics, management of trader portfolios, and the consumption of a huge amount of data from providers like Bloomberg and Reuters. Our journey actually started at least 30 years ago in a famous hedge fund. I'm not going to mention the name here. Even our use of messaging middleware goes back well over 20 years now. But first, let me introduce you to our use case, what we basically do, and how we use Pulsar. Inside, the name of our platform is a large system with various use cases for messaging. One of the main use cases is the consumption of real-time market data feeds, which means we are processing around 4 billion messages a day today. You can actually imagine the system as a giant dependency graph. Data is streaming through this graph. The roots of the dependency graph are the various data sources. They can be static or market data. The nodes in the graph are calculations carried out asynchronously. The data flowing through is mainly financial data like interest rates, FX, stock prices, credit curves, and such. This graph is implemented as a generic system. It can change dynamically based on the dependencies among the financial products. For example, a certain convertible bond can depend on a stock and some interest rates, and these can be dynamically configured based on the trader requirements or the scenarios we are interested in. On the messaging level, all this typically boils down to a PubSub type of communication and stream processing. However, since we can have various what-if type of scenarios, for example, a trader or a risk manager can be interested in what happens if the market conditions change like this or that, we also need to use the same infrastructure to serve requests on demand. This is a kind of request response or ask pattern when you think about it. As you can see here, our messaging was entirely implemented on a product called TIBCO Rendezvous until very recently. To complicate things further, our platform inside has a heterogeneous code base, as you would expect from a system that has been around for over 3 decades. We have at least 5 languages, not counting smaller additions, and integrations with a lot of other systems using a range of messaging middleware. As an example, our system has to be able to communicate over various implementations of JMS like EMS, ActiveMQ for example, and countless protocols. Now let me say a few words about TIBCO Rendezvous at this point. Not sure how many in the audience have heard about TIBCO Rendezvous or even TIBCO. Let me give you a quick summary. TIBCO Rendezvous has been a messaging system especially popular in finance. It's a fast, reliable, easy to use, well, mostly, and it has been around for a long time. In fact, it was a trailblazer in many ways. It was already available when the market in messaging was very, very limited. Before JMS was introduced, MQ and similar were common at the time, without any of the sophisticated open source alternatives we have today. Rendezvous is very fast. It's a PGM-based messaging middleware. PGM is basically like TCP for multicast and broadcast. It effectively gives you a quasi-reliable multicast or broadcast transport between hosts. So it served its time, at least in finance. Unfortunately, this efficiency and simplicity comes at a price. TIBCO Rendezvous, there are no delivery guarantees, no persistence, at least not in the default certified mode. It's not as horizontally scalable out of the box as Pulsar, and there's no transactional support. And most of all, It's not open source, which also affects cost of ownership, availability of tools, among other things. As I mentioned, at this point we had over 20 years experience with TIBCO, and it's fair to say it has become a love-hate relationship. So we decided it was time to move on. As you might imagine, we have carried out a thorough evaluation and took a long and hard look at what we really needed from message-oriented middleware. This was a serious decision for us when you think about the fact that the last similar change took place 20 years ago. Long story short, our evaluation started around 3 years ago and we narrowed down the options to Kafka and Pulsar at the time. We found that Kafka had a large user base. It was a well-understood system which we assumed would be very mature by that time. This was largely true. However, we also found that probably due to the fact that Kafka was the first of its kind, it had some really rough edges. First of all, the semantics were not very clear. The API was very low level for an application developer, with some inconveniences that were very hard to justify for us. Then, being a very technical team, we also started looking at the internals, and we were not convinced by what we saw there. The other option we evaluated was a relatively new player at the time, Apache Pulsar. In fact, it was so new, we completely discounted it at first. Then we slowly started to realize it actually got many things right. It has better, quite clear semantics, an API that is much easier to use for a high-level application developer, and we found that performance was comparable or even superior to Kafka, and it already had consistent API in various languages, most importantly in the ones that we cared about. The only thing that was a bit of a concern to us was the size of the user base at the time. However, based on what we saw, it was pretty clear to us that this was overall a much better system in many ways than anything we had seen in the market. So in the long run, we were quite certain it will become a major force. So we took the plunge and went all the way with Pulsar. Okay, so this was kind of our backstory. Now I'd like to talk about the important bits, which is our experience with Pulsar so far. First of all, Pulsar and TIBCO Rendezvous being completely different messaging systems operating on a different level. Rendezvous being a very fast, low-level, almost UDP-like PGM-based system, and Pulsar a much higher-level system with rich semantics. One concern for us was performance. It turned out that for most purposes, our concerns were unfounded. Of course, there had been a slight increase in latency as expected, but this was acceptable to us. In terms of the throughput though, we have seen absolutely no difference for our message load. In fact, what we gained is improved scalability. Pulsar being horizontally scalable out of the box is something we can certainly utilize and build on in the future. Being application developers, it was important to us to know how easy it is to use and integrate with Pulsar. Our experience so far has been very positive. We ended up with cleaner code, cleaner configuration, and better segregation of environments. We also improved security due to the cleaner structure of Pulsar. Pulsar being cloud-friendly helped us implement our cloud transition as well. In terms of admin and tooling, I think there is still place for improvements, but we have no doubts that these tools will become available with growing adoption. But there was more. I'd like to highlight a few of the positive impacts of switching to Pulsar that were kind of unexpected to us. First of all, because of the persistence and the rich semantics, our engineers could implement features that improved the resilience of our platform. We also gained new functionalities. To give you an example, because topics can be used as a log, if a component is restarted, we could just go back and reconsume messages instead of re-implementing a separate reinitialization process. So basically, we got this feature for free. We also managed to develop better tooling than we had previously. Now we could just go back and see what happened in case of production issue, for example. We could just replay history and investigate an issue. We didn't need to catch problems at real time, which is obviously a much harder thing to do. Again, it came for free without making any changes to our code, just by migrating to Pulsar. Messaging is really big in enterprise environments like financial institutions. As we moved to Pulsar, we started asking ourselves the question, is there anything it cannot do? Can we maybe replace all our existing message-oriented middleware with Pulsar? Well, certainly the rich semantics allows it to do what traditional message queue systems have to offer. On top of that, ledger-like structure is ideal for financial applications where changes typically happen in discrete steps, transactions, with strict requirements for audit trails and traceability in general. Based on these, it certainly looks like Pulsar can give other message-oriented middlewares a run for their money. Finally, I'd like to share with you a bit about our contributions to the Pulsar ecosystem. I have mentioned already that tooling was one of the areas where we found Pulsar a bit lacking. To address that, we have come up with a number of useful tools in the migration process that we have already open sourced or will soon open source. You can actually try them yourself if you follow this link. So Pulsar Listen is a tool to listen on topics. It allows tracing and dumping messages. It can be useful for both admins and developers. Pulsar Stat is an admin tool to calculate and monitor various statistics using the admin API, something similar to statistics tools like VMstat. Pulsar Top is a top-like application. Again, it shows real-time statistics on various aspects of Pulsar. Scalesbridge allows bridging between Pulsar and other messaging systems like AWS, SQS, SNS, JMS, or TIBCO Rendezvous, and so on. We have also implemented a simple request response or ask pattern since this was natively supported in TIBCO Rendezvous. This request response pattern can be easily used by anyone through the Scales library. Finally, a few words about our future plans. Based on what we've seen so far, we would certainly like to see more of our message-oriented middleware to be migrated to Pulsar. In fact, it looks like an ideal candidate to be the firm-wide standard at some point and the go-to choice for any messaging use case. We will also continue to develop more open source tools around Pulsar, which will hopefully help other users too. And finally, we'd like to utilize persistent support more than today, maybe venturing into the realm of keeping primary copies of data in Pulsar itself. So overall, I think it's fair to say we haven't looked back since, and our love story with Pulsar continues. And we really hope that it will remain a fruitful relationship for a very long time. Thank you.